Does Ki die in Outer Banks? Kiara's Season 5 fate explained. Warning: major spoilers for Outer Banks Season 5. No, Kiara Carrera does not die. She survives the final season and ultimately gets one of the more hopeful endings among the Pogues. After everything she goes through following JJ's death, Kiara becomes a marine biology intern, buys JJ's old property, and keeps his memory alive. So, does Kiara die in Outer Banks Season 5?
No.
But the final season puts Kiara through some of the most dangerous and emotional situations of the entire series. After watching JJ die at the end of Season 4, Kiara begins Season 5 completely devastated. And for much of the final season, her entire purpose is centered on one thing: getting revenge on Chandler Groff. Groff is the man who murdered JJ, and Kiara isn't willing to simply move on. But her journey ultimately becomes much more complicated than revenge. She has to learn how to live with JJ's death, confront the legend of the Blue Crown, survive the Pogues' final treasure hunt, and eventually figure out what she wants her own future to look like. And that's what makes Kiara's ending so important. What happens to Kiara at the beginning of Season 5? Season 5 begins immediately in the emotional aftermath of JJ's death. JJ was killed by his biological father, Chandler Groff, in Morocco after Groff took the Blue Crown. Kiara was there when it happened. She watched JJ die, and that completely changes her. Netflix's official Season 5 setup describes Kiara as one of the Pogues trying to pick up the pieces after losing their best friend. But Kiara doesn't simply grieve quietly. She becomes angry. She wants Groff to suffer. She wants justice for JJ. And she is prepared to risk almost anything to get it. That's why some viewers begin wondering whether Kiara herself could become another casualty. She's constantly putting herself in dangerous situations. But ultimately, she survives. Does Kiara get killed by Groff?
No.
In fact, Kiara eventually gets the confrontation with Groff that she's been waiting for. Groff is responsible for JJ's death, but he also continues causing problems throughout the final season as he tries to escape with the treasure. Eventually, Kiara tracks him down. And this confrontation becomes one of the biggest moments of the finale. Groff is trying to escape with the stolen Royal Merchant gold when Kiara confronts him. A hurricane is raging. The situation is extremely dangerous. And Kiara is finally face-to-face with the man who killed the person she loved. She asks Groff the question that has been haunting her. Why did he kill JJ? Groff's answer reveals just how deeply twisted his relationship with his son had become. He couldn't stand that JJ had something he never had. JJ had friends. He had Kiara. He had a family that loved him. And Groff couldn't accept that. That realization makes Kiara's anger even stronger. Does Kiara kill Groff? Yes, Kiara is ultimately responsible for Groff's death. This is one of the most important moments of her Season 5 storyline. During the confrontation, Kiara manages to tie Groff to the boat's broken mast. She then cuts the rope. Groff falls into the water. The storm and the sinking boat make it impossible for him to escape. He ultimately drowns. So Kiara does get revenge for JJ. But the show makes an important distinction. Getting revenge doesn't bring JJ back. And Kiara eventually has to understand that. What happens to Kiara after Groff dies? This is where Kiara's story becomes much more emotional. For most of Season 5, she's been focused on Groff. She believes that if she can make him pay, she might finally feel better. But after Groff dies, the reality hits her. JJ is still gone. The person she loved isn't coming back. And that's something she has to accept. This is why the Blue Crown becomes so important. Kiara learns about the legend that the crown can supposedly bring back the dead. Naturally, she starts wondering, could JJ actually come back? For someone grieving the way Kiara is, that possibility is almost impossible to ignore. Does the Blue Crown bring JJ back?
No.
JJ remains dead. The Blue Crown doesn't magically resurrect him. Instead, Kiara's experience with the crown becomes much more symbolic. She sees JJ and is confronted with memories of their relationship and the life they shared. But it isn't a literal resurrection. The crown doesn't undo the events of Season 4. Rudy Panko doesn't return as a living JJ in Season 5. And that is extremely important to Kiara's character. She finally understands that she can't spend the rest of her life trying to reverse JJ's death. She has to carry his memory forward instead. Does Kiara survive the hurricane?
Yes.
And this is one of the moments where it genuinely looks like she might die. After her confrontation with Groff, the boat is taking on water. The hurricane is getting worse. Kiara starts throwing the Royal Merchant gold overboard because the weight is making the situation even more dangerous. Then she falls into the water. For a moment, the situation looks extremely serious. But John B., Sarah, and Pope manage to rescue her. Kiara survives. The Pogues make it back towards safety, although the hurricane causes enormous destruction across Kildare. So, once again, Ki survives another impossible situation. And considering everything she's gone through, that's a pretty fitting ending for her. What happens to Kiara and JJ's relationship? Even though JJ is gone, Kiara doesn't simply forget him. Their relationship remains one of the emotional foundations of her ending. The two finally became a couple in Season 3 after years of friendship. Season 4 made their relationship even stronger. And then Groff took it away. Kiara therefore spends much of Season 5 trying to figure out how to live without him. The finale doesn't say that she suddenly stops loving JJ. Instead, it shows that she learns to live with the loss. That's a much more realistic conclusion. JJ remains part of who she is. But he doesn't prevent her from having a future. What does Kiara do with her money? After the Pogues finally recover the Royal Merchant gold, Kiara gets her share. And she uses it in a way that is very different from what we might expect. She buys JJ's old property and rebuilds it. This is incredibly meaningful. Instead of using the money to buy something flashy or escape Kildare completely, Kiara uses it to preserve something connected to JJ. She also buys her parents a boat and creates a memorial for JJ. That tells us everything about where Kiara's character ends up. She isn't trying to erase JJ. She's creating a way to remember him. Does Kiara stay in the Outer Banks?
Yes.
And that's another major part of her ending. Kiara doesn't simply leave Kildare behind. Instead, she builds a future there. She purchases JJ's property. She establishes a connection to the place where she grew up. And she begins pursuing the career she always wanted, marine biology. That's a beautiful, full-circle moment. Before the treasure hunts became her life, Kiara was passionate about the ocean and marine life. Season 5 finally allows her to return to that part of herself. She becomes a marine biology intern. So instead of spending the rest of her life chasing treasure, Kiara chooses a career connected to the ocean. That's a huge sign of personal growth. What does Kiara's ending mean? Kiara's ending is really about learning to live after loss. At the beginning of the series, Kiara is rebellious and frustrated with her parents. She doesn't want to be controlled. She doesn't want to fit into the world around her. Then she becomes part of the Pogues adventures. She falls in love with JJ. She survives countless dangerous situations. And eventually she loses him. That could have destroyed her. Instead, she uses the experience to build something meaningful. She doesn't forget JJ. She doesn't stop loving him. But she doesn't let his death destroy her future. That's the real victory. Does Kiara find love again? The finale doesn't give Kiara another major romance. And that's actually fitting. After JJ's death, she doesn't need another relationship to complete her story. Her ending is about herself, her career, her home, her parents, her friends, and JJ's memory. The show doesn't need to immediately pair her with someone else. Instead, Kiara gets the freedom to discover who she is outside of her relationship with JJ. And that may be one of the healthiest endings any of the characters receive. What happens to Ki and the other Pogues? Kiara remains connected to the group even as everyone begins moving in different directions. John B. and Sarah eventually build a family. Pope and Cleo settle into their future together. Rafe leaves Kildare with Sophia. And Kiara remains connected to the people who have been her family since the beginning. The Pogues may no longer be teenagers running around together every day, but their friendship remains. And that's important. The final season isn't about keeping everyone frozen in the same place. It's about watching them grow up. Does Kiara die in the final episode?
No.
Kiara survives the final confrontation with Groff. She survives the hurricane. She survives the treasure hunt. And she survives the loss of JJ. In fact, she gets one of the clearest futures of any character. She becomes a marine biology intern. She buys JJ's old property. She creates a memorial for him. And she continues living in a way that honors the person he was. Kiara's final fate explained. So, does Ki die in Outer Banks Season 5? Absolutely not. Kiara survives. And her ending is actually one of the most emotional in the entire series. She starts Season 5 consumed by grief and revenge. She wants Groff to pay for killing JJ. Eventually, she confronts Groff and causes his death by cutting the rope holding him to the boat during the hurricane. But revenge doesn't solve her pain. The blue crown doesn't bring JJ back. Instead, Kiara finally accepts that JJ is gone while keeping his memory alive. After the Pogues recover the treasure, Kiara uses her share of the money to buy and rebuild JJ's old property. She also buys her parents a boat and leaves a memorial for JJ. And most importantly, she returns to the dreams she had before the treasure hunts took over her life. Marine biology. Kiara becomes a marine biology intern and begins building a future around the ocean she has always loved. That's why her ending is so powerful. Kiara doesn't get JJ back. She doesn't erase what happened. She doesn't pretend that losing him didn't change her. Instead, she learns how to live with the loss. And perhaps the most important thing is that she doesn't let Groff's actions determine the rest of her life. Groff is gone. JJ is remembered. Kiara survives. And she finally gets the chance to become the person she always wanted to be. After 5 seasons of treasure hunts, danger, and heartbreak, Ki gets something the Pogues rarely had before, a future.